everyone, my name is Leanne and today I am bringing you a really exciting video. This is one of my favourite videos to make throughout the entirety of the year, and that is my top 10 favourite books of the year so far. Now these are the books that I've read in 2019. They are not all necessarily published in 2019, although some of them are, but these are just the books that I've happened to read this year so far. It's something that I've spoken about before, but I do quickly want to reassert the distinction for me in that I do think there's a difference between like the best books I've read and my favourite books that I've read, because for me a favourite book is normally something that I've had quite a personal connection or reaction to, whereas I think saying the best books I've read is far more objective. Like I think there are definitely some books that I've read this year that are objectively better than some of the books that are on my favourite books list. As I said, this is one of my favourite videos to make throughout the year because I think it's such a good video to look back on at the end of the year when I make my overall favourite books of the year, because it's really interesting to see which books made the cut and which ones didn't. But yeah, I've got a mix of fiction, non-fiction, I've got a little bit of poetry as well. So without further ado, let's get into the books. I have tried to put them in some sort of order, but I feel like if you asked me on any other day, the order would be slightly different. But coming in at number 10, we have Starfish by Akemi Dawn Bowman. This is a YA novel that follows a girl named Kiko who really wants to get into a very prestigious art college, but unfortunately she is rejected, and the book follows her reevaluating what she wants to do with her life next. It also deals a lot with her very difficult home life. Her mother is very emotionally manipulative, and she also has a lot of prejudice towards her own kids because they are half Japanese. This book deals a lot with Kiko's social anxiety, and I thought the representation of that was really great. I found it very true to life, comparing it to my experiences of social anxiety when I was a teenager. I really enjoyed the romance plot of this story. One of the people that helps Kiko figure out what she wants to do next is an old friend named Jamie, and that blossoms into a romance. A lot of cute moments in this book where I had like a genuine like physical reaction to it because I just thought it was so cute. What I really appreciated about this book is that romance plot doesn't take center at any point, not in terms of the plot but also not for Kiko. She is always thinking about putting herself and her career and her education first. It's a fantastic YA novel and I really found myself rooting for Kiko. I really enjoyed how it had so much to do with like accepting yourself as beautiful. I really enjoyed that aspect of the story as well, and it's a YA book that I would just really recommend. On to the first of two non-fiction books on this list, we have Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I have been a fan of Dolly Alderton for probably about a year now. I love both of her podcasts, The High Low, which is like a news and current events podcast that she does with her fellow journalist Pandora Sykes. And she also has a podcast called Love Stories, which I believe was launched to go alongside the promotion of this book. And she talks to like various celebrities about their experiences of love in all of its forms. But this memoir is Dolly's own experiences of love. It takes us through, I think, her teens, through her early 20s, into her late 20s, and it basically just takes a look at her experiences of dating, sex, relationship. And I think if you are a young woman who is navigating the dating scene, you will find a lot to relate to in this book. The early sections of the book I didn't relate to so much. A lot of it was kind of alcohol-fueled adventures, which isn't something that I particularly relate to. But I think the later sections where she's talking about her experiences when she's a bit older was definitely stuff that I related to. There is so much wisdom in this book, and this book taught me about the boyfriend experience, which is something that I'm still angry about. This book really feels like you are sitting down with a friend and talking about your love lives, and I think that's one of the amazing things about this book, is that while Dolly is exploring romantic relationships or like dating men, what is really at the core of this book are her incredible female friendships. I think ultimately the book culminates in really being a love story to the women in her life. This is definitely one that I want to reread, and rereadability is a really big factor for me when it comes to picking favourite books. Next on my list is The Break by Marian Keyes. This is a book that really took me by surprise, and it sparked off my assertion that 2019 will be the year of the rom-com for me. I read this for the Irish Readathon back in March and I absolutely adored it. This is a book that follows a woman in I think her 40s named Amy, and her husband decides that he would like to take a 6-month break. So he would like to go off traveling and do whatever the hell he wants, and essentially just abandon her and his kids. The book follows Amy in the aftermath of that and her trying to reevaluate and navigate her life. She's reconsidering whether she will even want to be with her husband after this break, whether she can get past that kind of what is ultimately a betrayal. We also have flashbacks where we look at Amy developing feelings for someone else and her trying to resist that. So many incredible subplots to this novel as well, and while I think this book could be a lot shorter because not all of those subplots are 100% necessary to the main plot, I wouldn't want any of those subplots to go anywhere because I think they were all fantastic, and I think every side character in this book could have a novel of their own. For instance, we have Amy's mother, who is in a very difficult situation because her husband, Amy's father, has Alzheimer's, and obviously that is really impacting her life, her social life. She's also starting to make appearances on Amy's daughter's YouTube channel, and that all goes a bit viral, and it's follows the daughter navigating her sort of newfound fame. There's also a really important subplot to do with the Repeal the Eighth movement in Ireland, which I really appreciated seeing depicted in this novel. I thought it was really, really necessary. This was the first Marian Keyes novel I'd ever read, and I'm definitely keen to read more. Next is the first and only poetry book on this list. We have Hold Your Own by Kate Tempest. Kate Tempest has been one of my favourite poets for a number of years now. Her style of poetry is just my favourite. It is like really rhythmic, rhyme-heavy slam poetry, almost like rap style. If you've read a bit of Kate Tempest before, you will not be surprised by the themes in this book. There is a lot to do with love and relationships, with wealth and poverty. There's also a huge focus on community and what it's like to suffer from alienation. But what I think is really fascinating about this collection is all that social commentary is told through the lens of a Greek myth retelling. This collection is based on the myth of the blind prophet Tiresias. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce their name, but I thought this was a really fascinating way to experience their story through this like social commentary poetry. There's also an element of gender switching in this story, which I believe is part of the original myth, but I am no Greek expert, so don't quote me on that. I know you can get an audio download of this as well and listen to Kate perform it, which I haven't actually done yet, and I really, really should, because I still like repeatedly listen to Let Them Eat Chaos, which is one of Kate's more recent collections. But yeah, Kate Tempest is fantastic, and she's one of those poets that I really recommend for people if they are reluctant poetry readers. Next on my top 10 list is Queer Intentions by Amelia Abraham. I was lucky enough to go to the launch event for this book in Gaze the Word, and I will leave the video that Book Break did for that launch down below in the description if you want to check it out. But this is definitely my favourite non-fiction book of the year so far. I think this is superbly written. This book follows the author as she travels around talking to various people who identify as LGBTQ+. It's a really intersectional and insightful look at the queer community, and I learned so much from this book. And what I keep saying about it is, no matter how informed you feel on queer culture, there will be something new in this book for you. Whether you are coming at it from the perspective of someone that doesn't really know anything at all and wants to be a better ally and understand more, this is really, really accessible and a great introduction. But at the same time, if you are someone who is perhaps part of the LGBTQ+ community and feels really like quite well informed on these things, I think there will still be a lot in here that you didn't realize or you weren't aware of. That's definitely the experience I had reading this book. Amelia covers a real breadth of topics in the people that she talks to. She is looking at pride and the origins of pride, how it has become slightly commercialized now. She takes a look at marriage and what marriage means for various people in the queer community. One of the most fascinating chapters for me personally was the chapter on drag, because I felt like that was something that I didn't know a lot about, and it was really interesting to see people that had quite a negative view on the phenomenon of RuPaul's Drag Race. It wasn't really a perspective I'd considered before. There's also discussion of like queer spaces, so like gay bars. And there's also some stuff in here on the impact of YouTube on the LGBT plus community and queer representation on this platform. It's definitely my favorite nonfiction book that I've read this year so far. Now we are reaching the top 5, and coming in at number 5 we have An American Marriage by Tiari Jones, which was the book that I wanted and predicted would win the Women's Prize for Fiction this year, and it did. This book follows newlywed couple Celestial and Roy, and what happens to them when Roy is falsely accused and imprisoned for a crime that he didn't commit. Both Roy and Celestial know that he is innocent, and also the reader knows that he is innocent, and I think how that topic was handled was done really sensitively, and it was just done really, really well. Much of the novel is told through the exchange of letters while Roy is in prison. We follow their marriage as they struggle to maintain it, as Celestial tries to carry on with her life while Roy is in prison. Her career becomes really, really successful, and she also starts a relationship with someone that she has been friends with for a really long time. One of the things I really loved about this book was how you see things from so many different angles. Because you are flipping between people's perspectives, you feel a lot of empathy for everyone involved in this very complicated situation. So you may have a letter from Roy's perspective where you are completely agreeing with him and you think Celestial isn't being very fair, but then when you get Celestial's response to that, it flips your perspective and you empathize with how she's feeling a lot more. It's a really, really fantastic book that looks at the fragility of relationships. It looks at racial prejudice within the American justice system and incarceration. And I think that's one of the really impressive things about this book, is that I would equally recommend it to someone who is interested in like politics, to someone who reads like contemporary women's fiction or like romance novels. I would recommend it to both of those readers, and obviously the overlap that there is in the middle, like me. At number 4, we have a middle grade novel, and that is A Pages and Co. by Anna James. This is the first book in the series that follows a character named Matilda, or Tilly Pages. Tilly lives with her grandparents, who also own a bookstore, and she is often helping out at the bookstore. She herself is a voracious reader, and she begins to realize that she can speak to characters from her favorite books. His power soon progresses, and she realizes that there is a lot going on that she wasn't aware of, and she is able to wander through the pages of these books. So for instance, some of the characters she interacts with include Alice from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Anne of Green Gables. And as these were books that I had already read and really enjoyed, I found that utterly captivating. We also see her grandmother interacting with Elizabeth Bennet, which I thought was a really nice touch. That moment in the novel is one of my favourites because I can really see like a dual readership there, of a child reader not immediately knowing who Elizabeth Bennet is, but as an adult reader I was able to like cop on to who the grandmother was talking to. It's a beautiful book that I think can really capture the imagination of child readers and adult readers alike, and I am so excited to read the remaining books in this series. Like, I am so excited for them to come out. One really geeky thing that I love about this book is the typesetting, because there are like moments in this book where the illustrations interact with the words on the page, and I just thought that was Oh, I loved it. Just talking about this book, I feel like this evening I want to get into bed with a cup of tea and just reread this because it was such a joy to read. Number 3 on my list is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. Now, this book was longlisted for the Women's Prize, but I was so gutted when it didn't make it onto the shortlist, and I was just like confused as to why it didn't. This was the second Sarah Moss book that I'd ever read. I'd also read The Tidal Zone a couple of years ago, and that was one of my favourite books in the year that I'd read it. Ghost Wall follows the experience of a family, so a girl who's probably about like 12 or 13 years old, her mother and her father, as they go off to be part of like a university kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, it's like an archaeological experience, but it's like an experiment, and then like they live as if they were in the Iron Age. One of the things that I found really fascinating about this book was how the men in the novel are all like really quick to start falling into really like gendered stereotypes about, and there's a lot to do with like feminist historiography and how we perhaps only think history was a particular way because of who wrote down this history, which is a topic that I've been fascinated by for a really long time. There are also so many other like really big topics crammed into this book, and I think that's what's really powerful and impressive about this book, is that it is really, really slim, but all of these really complex topics are really given the breath and the space to breathe. So there's a lot to do with abusive power dynamics, a class divide between the north and the south of England. I thought the book was paced really well, and I think as you learn more about this family and the dynamics and the complications within that family unit, you are kind of going along and realizing things along with that young girl. You realize everything a little bit before she does, and I think that pacing was done really fantastically. I just love Sarah Moss as a writer. I think whatever she writes is incredible, and I need to dive into her back catalogue. Okay, now we are into the top 2, and I feel like perhaps these 2 in particular, I could switch them around on any given day, but coming in at number 2, we have Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of my favourite authors. I went on an absolute binge of her back catalogue last year, and I've got a couple more books from her back catalogue that I need to read, but when I saw she had a new book coming out, I was beyond excited. This is a fascinating novel, and it's told in a really interesting way, in that it is told through, it's framed as if it's a non-fiction book, so it's like the book is pretending to be non-fiction, and it's told through transcripts of interviews that a hypothetical journal, like the transcribed interviews are put in a chronological order, so you see how people within the story, the characters, they remember things slightly differently, or they will spin a story in a particular way so they come out of it looking better or whatever. I haven't even said what this book is about. This book follows a rock band in, I think it's like the late 60s or the 70s, which is kind of very similar in like presentation to kind of like Fleetwood Mac. We have the original band, The Six, who joined together with a singer named Daisy Jones. Through these interviews, we are following the conception of this band, leading up to their phenomenal success, the various complex relationships that there were within the band and with people outside of the band, dealing with fame and like, it's a stereotype to say, but like sex, drugs and rock and roll, songwriting process and the kind of emotion that goes into that. But it ultimately culminates in trying to figure out what happened when the band split up after their final concert, which is an event that has always been shrouded in a degree of mystery. No one has really known what happened. The characters in this book feel really genuine to me. Like I really recognize them as actors. Daisy in particular is fascinating, and I feel like if she was an actual person, I would be obsessed with her. I think ultimately at the core of this novel there is a celebration of female friendships and relationships, the different ways that women can be feminine, the different ways that women can display their strength. It's a brilliant book, and it's one that since I've read it I've been trying to push into people's hands. Everything that Taylor Jenkins Reid does, I adore. So we have made it to my favourite book of the year so far, and that is Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. Now, I think I would have loved this book no matter what time I read it at, but you know when you read a book and it's at the exact perfect moment in your life, that is what I had with this book. This follows Queenie, who is in her I think she's in like her mid-20s. She is from a Jamaican family and she lives in London. She works for, is it a magazine or a newspaper? This book basically follows the aftermath of her going through a really difficult breakup. It looks at how she isn't focusing on her career after the breakup, how she continues to hope that that romance will be reignited. It follows her engaging in a lot of sex as an unhealthy coping mechanism. It follows her family relationships, especially the complex relationship that she has with her mother. It looks at her friendships, and again, this is a book where I feel like female friendship is a really core value of this. It has a lot of focus on various aspects of Queenie's physical and mental health, and I think there were a lot of things in this book that I don't see depicted enough in fiction, and I think we as a society don't talk about enough. So for instance, like going for sexual health checkups and making sure you don't have any STIs, that kind of thing. There's also depiction of miscarriage in this book, which is something that really resonated with me. I was also reading this book while I was house hunting to move to London, and there is a part of this book where Queenie is looking for somewhere else to live after she's gone through this breakup, and it was so funny because like literally we had the same budget. That's kind of what I mean by reading it at the exact right moment in my life, and there were also a number of other elements that resonated with me as well. Find yourself really rooting for Queenie throughout this book. I think she's a really likable character, and while you find yourself being frustrated with her at moments, you are definitely supporting her all the way. Really funny book as well. I loved the interactions between a group of friends called the Corgis. So like Queenie has her Corgis, and these are like, it's a group of women that are brought from like different parts of Queenie's life, and you wouldn't necessarily throw all these women together and imagine them to be friends, but it's their love for their friend that bonds them. It's really funny, it's perceptive, it's really relatable. It's one of the best pieces of commercial fiction that I think I've ever read. And I'm just obsessed. Again, this is a book that I want to push into everyone's hands. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I don't feel like I've heard enough people talking about it on BookTube. So there we have it. These are my top 10 books of the year so far. I think it's been a really great reading year so far, so I feel really good going into the second half of the year. I'm now at the point where I feel like, even though obviously I've been reading for like my whole life, I do feel like now I'm really at the point where I know my own taste. So I'm really excited to see what these shelves behind me hold for me in the rest of the year. Leave me a comment down below if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, and if you have any thoughts on them, I would love to hear them. As ever, all of the books will be linked down below in the description if you want to hear more about them. Let me know what your top book of the year so far is. I would love to know. Anyways, that's all from me today. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.